Gresham College presents The Making of a Masterpiece, Is It Possible? By Professor Christopher Hogwood, CBE.
Good afternoon and happy Valentine's Day. I hope it's been full of wonderful surprises rather than nasty shocks. And our Valentine offering is Mozart. Most suitable question for Valentine's Day. Everybody loves Mozart. In the context of this year's overriding theme, which is working out how masterpieces are put together and how you are... I've lost you. How the writing of masterpieces is combined with sympathy for the players, balancing the talents of players, giving you what you expect as well as what they expect. Today I thought we would focus on one Mozart piece and start off more by talking about the instrument which is featured in this quartet, the oboe with Mea Wade, and finding out what Mozart did that was unusual, what he found about the oboe that was capable of expansion, possibly, other questions you might well have about instruments. One that always intrigues me is this question of whether it's the instrument maker or the player or the composer who leads the way in developing. That is, does a composer demand more keys on the piano and then the piano maker supplies those keys, or is the maker interested in developing the technology of the instrument and the composer follows along and exploits it? But in the context of this particular scoring, we have three string players who we are going to, I apologise, ignore for the moment. And we're going to concentrate a little bit on the oboe. So here, let's sit here. And here is a modern oboe. If any of you have ever made a noise with a blade of grass, you basically know how the oboe works, and you can just show the potential of the double reed.
Okay, so this is the reed. It's fair.
Flexible. Oboists, I think, probably more than any other woodwind players have horrors about the reed. I've never known an oboist who didn't have nightmares about the business of creating reeds, scraping reeds, making them, and then at the vital moment just before the concert having them go off. So,
yes.
Do you make your own reeds?
I do. I was up until the wee hours in the morning last night making my reeds for today. It's amazing how demanding it is just playing two pieces of wood that are so ridiculously detailed to produce a sound. We are completely bound by the cane, by certain types of scraping, by the thickness of the wood, and it's quite hard for us oboists. The violin, the viola, cello can just pick up their instruments whenever they want. The flute can pick up their instruments and play it, and the sound is there. And we are completely bound by this brilliant, sometimes not brilliant, piece of bamboo that we so love a lot.
It is, and it's unfortunately one of these sciences which can't be improved by modern technology, I think, because I had a friend who did invent a fairly passable plastic reed, which didn't have any of these problems, but it sounded awful. He was a player, an amateur player, but he did give it to professionals who should have made it sound good, and it didn't really. I think we're still... people talk about certain sorts of cane and certain sort of bamboo grown in the south of France. Is that the excuse?
We have some in China. It's very dependent on the type of weather you get. If it's a good year for the cane, it's very similar to wine. If the soil is good, if there's the right amount of sunshine, the cane might be good. But we don't know. You have to wait until it ages, and then, yeah, it's very different.
There's lots of imponderables in the life of the oboist. That's the beginning of the sound, because many people, I think, when you look at the orchestra playing, it's not always immediately clear from a distance how the actual sound is being produced in those instruments. Some will be working on this system of two pieces of cane together, the bassoon and the oboe are in the double reed category. Single reed instruments, though, like the saxophone, the clarinet, use only one reed bound against the rest of the mouthpiece. And of course, brass players are producing it all by making raspberry noises into the mouthpieces of their instruments. The flute is blowing across a sharp edge, making a whistle noise in the embouchure flute. The physical creation of sound in all instruments is a problem to begin with. Having created the sound, though, you then have to control it, turn it into varied notes, which means using shorter or longer instrument. The longer the tube, the lower the note will be, hence holes, keys nowadays. But I think the oboe that Mozart would have used would have not had many keys.
No, the classical oboe, which he would have written the quartet for, was a lot smaller size in the wood, and it only had two keys. It had an E-flat key and a C key, which was just to aid it to cover notes that you couldn't physically cover with your fingers, the holes. It was a hole down here, so you can't really stretch down to cover it. So it only had two keys.
Now you have many more keys than many more pads, many more holes than fingers. How is this mechanism controlled? Because it's extremely one thing working on top of another.
Well, it's extremely
levers,
rollers, springs, everything. Basically, the oboe developed with new music that was being written throughout the classical and romantic period. New keys would be added for new pieces or new notes. So a G-sharp key trill was needed in one of the pieces, so they added this key here. And it's kind of developed from the classical oboe, which was very similar to the modern day recorder, and kind of developing on from there. You just got more and more key work.
Has it stopped? Or are people still looking at new technical possibilities?
It hasn't stopped. There's an oboist called Christopher Hogwood, who is a fellowship at the Academy. He's doing a research thing there. He's just redesigning the oboe again. He's working with composers and with Howarth, the only English oboe supplier. They're developing the oboe to add more keys, so we can produce quarter tones, we can produce 2,000 more multiphonics. So a multiphonic is, I'll play one. So it's a very kind of new compositional thing that composers are working on at the moment. The modern oboe that I'm using has about 900 multiphonics. Chris's new 21st century oboe has 2,500. So it's completely increasing the range of new things we can do. Chris also has extended the top range of the oboe. Our top range is around the F and G, which is featured in the Mozart. Chris has now developed new fingerings to go a fourth higher than that, so it's going up to super C, super B, extremely high. So he's really working together with new composers to see how far the oboe can be pushed and make it more of a...
What is the official top note that you are professionally supposed to be able to
Professionally, we're supposed to play an A, which is... Let me see if I can get one out now. It's quite a push. Okay, that last one. If it was in a P. You have to bite the reed quite a lot, and if it was in a piece, I think you'd have to take a few months to make sure that it was completely in your playing.
And on the other end of the instrument, what's the lowest possible note that this can
The lowest
use?
note...
And is it safe? This is always the question, because oboists, certainly classical oboists, are the first people to tell you when an 18th century composer who didn't understand the oboe very well wrote down to its lowest note unthinkingly and produced a lot of it. Very often in the 18th century in orchestral writing, oboes would double the violins. And of course the violins can go well below middle C. The oboe has quite a problem down there, and so if it's asked to play a tutti line, you get a lot of very sour faces from the oboe section. The bottom note of this is...
It's a B flat, so just below middle C.
Just hear it going down to the...
Sounds a bit like a foghorn sometimes.
I think it's a rather nice sound. If one wants to go any lower, of course, you have other members of the oboe family, which one doesn't have to learn to play, but I think most people nowadays would expect to have a cor anglais.
Oboe d'amore less found that oboists play it because it's usually just used in the Bach cantatas and some nice things like that. So
Oboe da caccia.
Caccia, again, early music is kind of the main bit.
It always used to be a bit of a mystery to me because famous oboists in the past were caught in the dressing room before, I think Leon Goossens was caught unscrewing the bottom of the oboe there and screwing on a different end piece that had a sort of egg shape to it, and that made the instrument look like an oboe d'amore. And his colleagues said to him, well, what's the difference? And he said, £150. So it may not always be a musical consideration, but there are these rarities. Of all of them, I think the cor anglais is the one that most people would expect to play very good, and which most people will recognise from the big melody in the New World Symphony and similar things. So it is just a lower form. There used to be other versions of oboe, something called the tenorune. Have you ever come across the tenorune? It's sort of between a bassoon and an oboe. And goes down even a little lower than the cor anglais. So when instruments were built in families, then you had soprano, alto, tenor, bass versions of each family. Now it's sorted out a bit, I think. So we have. Are there any little oboes smaller than this?
Christopher Redgate, the super oboist, he has got a soprano oboe, which is a very, very small one, which helps him get his top notes a little easier. But this is kind of the standard one.
Good. And oboe repertoire, you have chamber music, of course, lots of solos in orchestra, of course, lots of orchestral music without solos.
Yeah.
There are always some people who seem to love the oboe in an orchestral score. Others, for some reason, Mendelssohn is one of the people. Can you think of any good oboe solo in Mendelssohn?
No.
It's very strange. Some composers perhaps went through a sort of difficult period early on in their life when they came across an awkward oboist or something and never seemed to have loved the instrument. Or maybe it was a period of transition in the development of the instrument, and they veered away from it. The Baroque used the oboe a lot. Classical music, people were selective, and Mendelssohn certainly seems to have been very, very cautious about using it. And thereafter, many, many big solos. In terms of music that you can play without any accomplices at all on your own, is there very much repertoire for the oboe absolutely solo?
There's some core pieces that we play. Usually they're more 20th century pieces. The Britten Metamorphosen from studying at the Academy there, we know those are one of the pieces for us to have under our repertoire belts. So that's one of the main ones, really.
I see you have.
I do.
Written here. Are you up for playing one of the metamorphoses? These are solo oboe pieces written on stories derived from Ovid, the transformations of various classical characters. You going to?
Yeah, I could play a bit. Try stand up.
The one I always remember from the set is the one that shows Narcissus looking at himself in a pond, and you have a very imaginative use of the oboe phrase representing him, mirrored by the inversion of that phrase going downwards, showing the his reflection in the water, and gradually as he's subsumed in the water, these two join together until it's a wonderful moment at the end where it ends up with a little fluttering trill, which is both him and his image fused into one. This one that you have up here
I'm playing Mea Wade, which is the story of she turned into a mountain after her children were sadly killed by Apollo, I think it was in the story.
Yes, she showed off. I think that was her problem. Like a lot of classical things, the tragic heroine sometimes had brought it on herself. And Niobe certainly showed off in public, saying, why should you all be worshipping this person and Zeus and Hercules, you know. I'm a perfectly good character. My father is Tantalus, I think. I have 6 daughters and 5 sons, and you should be worshipping me. So, of course, they killed her sons and daughters, and she burst into tears, and the metamorphosis of it was she was transformed into a little mountain top, which you can still see in Greece, which does look, it is true, like a lady's face, and in certain meteorological conditions, it sheds tears. So this is Niobe weeping for her children. Benjamin Britten didn't play the oboe, as far as we know, did he? So, what would you say about that as a piece of technical writing for the? I know everybody wonders how you manage the big section in the middle where there's absolutely no breath. Is that on the extremes of what is possible?
One of the qualities of oboes, I think, is the lyrical sound it creates, which is extremely difficult to sustain that very lyrical line, especially when you're decrescendoing or thinking. I think composers like to use the oboe because it sounds quite mournful in some places. So the problem, well, the difficulty I have with this is sustaining that lyrical sense of long phrases, and kind of you need to really support your breath, you need to listen to yourself a lot and just really focus on the long phrases.
But in fact, there's only one really long phrase, and the rest is beautifully written in terms of phrases that you remember,
Yeah.
lasting for 2 bars or so, and then there's a breathing point, and then another one and a breathing point. One senses quite a lot of filling up. Although, in fact, with the oboe, the difficulty is not getting the breath in, it's getting it out, because so little breath goes out through the reed. Your difficulty at the end of a long passage is not that you've run out of breath, but all the oxygen has gone and you're still full of something inside without something toxic, without any oxygen. So I think it's very cleverly written in that he builds up this expectation that solo oboe music must be short phrases and then take a breath and then another short phrase. And in that sense, it's beautifully done that suddenly he gets going and he goes on and on and on for 3 lines, 4 lines, and after that you come back to the disjointed phrases. Then I think it's a very simple composer's trick of using a symptom of the instrument for an architectural, for a sculptural purpose. How did he know the tricks? Did he write this for somebody who advised him?
This was written for Joy Boughton, I think, which was Rutland Boughton's daughter.
Yeah.
So Rutland wrote a lot of oboe music. He wrote a concerto for the oboe. So I think Britten knew a lot about the oboe also because he wrote the fantasy quartet for Leon Goossens, Leon Goossens was the big virtuoso of the 20th century, sorry. Most of the oboe repertoire is written for him. Vaughan Williams' concerto, the Bliss and the Backs and the fantasy quartet are all written for him. So he definitely knew a lot about oboe playing in that respect from meeting him.
Good composers consult. I think it's sometimes forgotten that great writing involves great technical knowledge, and that doesn't come automatic. It's not a matter of inspiration to know what the oboe can do and what its top note is and what fingerings are difficult. That is only acquired by sheer hard work of going out and researching it. And Britain used to be, I know, very keen that anybody who was going to have a work from him had to go with the instrument they played and play all its possibilities, the most rarefied. So all your new and wonderful top notes would have been in demand. And that was the way he wrote really wonderfully idiomatic music for the horn, for example, the tenor horn and strings, by talking endlessly with Dennis Brain, for talking with Julian Bream about the guitar, and he wrote really effective. And he also extended the vocabulary, the technical vocabulary of the instrument just by logic. Also being a close friend of Rostropovich and writing music for solo cello. He not only studied the existing music, talked it through with Rostropovich, had him play technical examples of what fitted the cello and watched how this was technically achieved. But then he began to suggest, what if you put your thumb there and do that? Couldn't you do something else on it? And he would push the performer into developing new techniques themselves, which is, I think, an extraordinarily imaginative way of adopting the persona of an instrument, and it then means it gives you a range of sounds that you can produce in your compositions that have not previously been heard in music for that instrument.
I know for this piece, Britten went to hear a performance by Holliger, who was doing not the premiere, and he wasn't very happy with the liberties that Holliger was taking with this solo performance. So the second publication, we all have metronome marks in the score now to make sure that we play it how he wanted it, rather than being a fantastic, taking all our...
Yes, there's always a question whether a composer should be that prescriptive. Whether what you write as a composer represents only one interpretation and that is it. This tends, I think, to be the attitude of a lot of people take nowadays to or the music of the last century. I won't say contemporary music, but music written within the era of recording. Because if you want to know what Stravinsky felt about a piece, although Stravinsky was often quite flexible about how people interpret music, but people tend to go to his recording, and that becomes a landmark, and the temperature, the tempo won't fluctuate, and the interpretation will try to imitate that. To a lot of players, that's a rather austere way of going about, because it rules out the contribution of the player. So I hope you take certain notice with written. And Stravinsky was the exception in his notation, that he did try to put almost everything that you sometimes feel you're almost straitjacketed into a version, and he famously said, there is no interpretation in music, you just play what's there, which of course you can do if every iota is dotted. But for freer music, I think there is some personal input. It comes to a different question, of course, when you are playing on an instrument which has a capacity different from that the composer would have known. And this turns us back a little, not on the very modern end of the oboe, but on what a modern player can think nowadays about playing music written for an instrument not so well equipped with keys. Not to say it was in any way worse, it was just different and did different things. As you said, with the Mozart quartet, he, for example, exploits at the very end the note that was the highest known note on the oboe. It no longer is. You can't do anything about that fact that technology has moved on and that Mozart's highest note is no longer the highest note. I think in the context of the piece, he makes it still sound as though it's the highest note. He makes an Everest effect to it. But he has other things, I think, in this quartet that he has to grapple with. One of them being, when you write a quartet for a famous soloist, this was written for Friedrich Ramm, who was the soloist in probably Europe's most famous orchestra in the 18th century, the Mannheim Orchestra, which played also in Munich. And he was the principal oboe. Mozart had come across him because he wrote the opera Idomeneo for performance in Munich. And the orchestra was the Mannheim Orchestra playing for that principal oboe, got quite a lot of solos and concertante music within Idomeneo, and as an extra present, Mozart wrote him a specific oboe quartet. Normally, I think string players would agree, what you normally expect from a civilized quartet is something to do with equality. Is that there tends to be a feeling that a proper string quartet writing, if it is for string players, should be a conversation of equals, and one person should not hog the limelight. There'll always be little subterfuges going on. When Haydn wrote a set of string quartets that were commissioned by a famous aristocrat who played the cello, naturally you expected to see rather more cello solos than you would have seen otherwise. But there is always this question of discretion, and the question that we're looking at today: how do you balance this awkwardness of having an instrument that you want to feature, that's capable of a lot of showing off, that has a lot of virtuosity available, a very distinctive sound, it's not a stringed instrument. You have to incorporate it in a quartet without offending the other players, but without, as it were, shortchanging your soloist. Well, the 18th century had quite a number of quartet forms that grew up. There was the conversational form where everybody was equal. There would have been earlier on the consort form where everybody basically subjugated their own line to a contrapuntal setup. There were quartets particularly popular in France and in Paris, which were called quatuor brillant or quatuor concertant, where the concertante element would be spread over the whole group. So there'd be a wonderful solo from the first violin in the first page, but there'd be an equally wonderful solo from the second violin in the next page, and then the viola would suddenly strike, and then everybody would fight it out in concerto terms. There were also quartets which were known as quatuor dialogue, that is, having a discourse. The quartet tended to be settings of already known material. So again, the French loved this. You could take folk tunes, popular tunes, themes from other pieces, themes from other people's operas or your own operas, set them in quartet form. It would lead you towards a type of quartet that was really melody dominated, and it was a nice way of showing off a tune plus an accompaniment, so 1 plus 3. And it's a little bit that line, I think, that Mozart was thinking on in this, because I think you probably agree that the other 3 players in this quartet don't get quite as much of the goodies as the solo oboe for various reasons. What we could do is just reshape ourselves and let's take it, just play a few examples to show how this runs. I think we can see how the division of interest is unfairly apportioned. If we just play from the beginning, can we silence the oboe? Just play what you have at the opening. This is music -1, and you will see this is definitely an accompanying part. Narrative, which is missing, is entirely in the oboe. Let's hear what the oboe. Wait, let's just do the oboe alone. That makes good narrative sense on its own, and I think you can supply mentally what might be supporting it, which was that very nice accompaniment. Another element that can be rationed out, and is rationed out again unfairly, string players might think, in favour of the solo oboe, is the degree of virtuosity that's showing off, the sort of things that Ram could do. He could clearly, well, what would you deduce from it? He can play long lines, can't he? He can play fast notes, incredibly rapid semiquavers up and down. He can also do big leaps. That's just show a few of these things, because they are, even in oboe terms, it's quite exceptional. Not all oboists would have taken to this sort of writing very easily. Yes. And some other running around stuff. Yeah, here's a wonderful running around. Yes. We come back to that one in a moment. There's one other way, providing you regard this as a sort of quartet based on a vocal background. That is, Mozart is thinking, as he so often is in his instrumental music, with an operatic plot in the back of his head. If you take the beginning of the slow movement, where you think for a moment the three strings actually have something to say in their own right, well, Mozart gives them all of 2 bars in which to discuss this sad little topic in D minor. And just when you think it's developing into an argument for them, what happens? But the diva comes in exactly like the soprano in the opera, singing a long, high top note, and you know immediately she's in charge of what's going on. And whatever these people do, we're now waiting to see what this imposed top line does. It's a perfectly operatic concept of showing superiority in the nicest musical way. So this is the opening of the slow movement. Perfect takeover. And you notice how everybody else obliges, okay? We all quieten down. There's not very much more to say in that movement for you. You've said it at the beginning, comes back a little bit later, but basically there's been a tacit agreement that she gets to say what she has to say. It's the diva principle. There's one other characterization, though. Mozart was never short on multiple characterizations, either of people in opera or instruments in concerted music. And that is when the instrument becomes a rebel and does something which it's not supposed to do. And there's a pretty way out example of this in the last movement, because this is one of these rare occasions where Mozart allows one player to go off in a different metrical measure than the rest of the group. You'll see what I mean if you just play a little bit in. The movement's in 6/8, so it's triple. Young T T 1 and T 1 and 2, and then it suddenly goes off in 4. Completely breaks away. This is not supposed to happen in a classical piece. Just play as your part, and you see where it breaks away. Completely unconventional. Just play what you have now, supporting that without the oboe, and you'll notice that these players just go on unconcerned. These are not rebels. These are whatever is going on outside it. Don't worry. Ignore her. We're just carrying on in 6/8. And they do. Nothing was metrically upsetting in that at all. What is magic, though, is the way this actually does work together, in spite of her going off on a vino of her own. So play it together, and you'll notice this complete revolution, and then the coming together at the end, seamlessly. Mozart's always accused of writing "look at me" music, but you couldn't have much better "look at me" music than that. I think Brown must have been very. We don't know what he thought about it, do we?
I think he quite liked it.
I hope he paid for it. That's it. And as we said before, there's this question of utilising for very special effects and retaining them till the last minute the highest note of the instrument, which is F. What is nice about Mozart, though, is he doesn't just show off by keeping the highest note for the last note. He hints at it, because at the end of the slow movement, you notice we come down in D minor, and the oboe plays and plays an arpeggio, just plays the end of the slow movement, and you see it's an arpeggio finishing on the top note of that harmony. So with that, he's sort of prepared the way. That's the way he writes a cadence. When it comes out in the major, let's not play it now, keep it as a shock. But he knows that he's prepared your ears. That's the sign of a really sophisticated composer. He's already set a train of thought going in your mind that cadences can go up the octave like that. And then you just hold your breath when you come to the end and you find at an even higher pitch, he's going to try to do the same thing again. More points in this piece, or we hear the whole piece? I think we'll hear the whole piece. Do a little tune. Thank you.
For more information, please visit www.gresham.ac.uk.